Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new article about the craft of writing. This piece is entitled, How to Beat Imposter Syndrome. You want to know something funny and painfully ironic? I got imposter syndrome trying to write this article. That's right. I kept putting this topic off because I had a voice in my head saying things like, "What do you know? You're just some random writer. Nobody actually cares what you think. You're not an expert, so stop pretending." I'm willing to bet you've heard similar thoughts in your writer's brain too over the years. You're not alone, trust me. Despite that voice in my head though, I decided it was time to write this article. So, without further ado, let's talk about imposter syndrome. So what is imposter syndrome anyway? Well, the Webster's Dictionary defines imposter syndrome as... Relax. I'm kidding. I'm not the kind of writer who opens an article with a dictionary definition, but I am the kind to make a joke about it. Imposter syndrome is that feeling you get when you suddenly start thinking you're a fraud. It's that voice that says, you're not good enough, or you don't deserve this. And you feel that way, despite evidence to the contrary. For some people, these thoughts spiral into a genuine fear that others will find out, and they'll be labeled as the imposters that they think they are. And here's a quote from Jonathan Snyder over on Blue Sky. For me, I look back at what I've actually accomplished to remind myself that I'm not pretending to be an author. I am one. It's one of those feelings that comes and goes, but here's the thing. It will come back. I often refer to imposter syndrome as the writer's version of the common cold, though it's really more like the flu. Everybody gets it, and they'll get it more than once. Name anybody. Any author, artist, architect, designer, carpenter, sculptor, doesn't matter. Pick a creative person from the past or the present, and I guarantee you they've felt the crushing weight of imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. Success doesn't make it go away either. I guarantee you Stephen King has felt it. George R.R. Martin has felt it. Hell, I'd bet good money William Shakespeare experienced imposter syndrome. It happens to everyone. They also say that misery loves company. But I know at this point you're asking, okay, so I'm not the only one, but what if it's true? What if I'm not good enough to be a real writer? Before we get into the article, I want to have you say two things for me right now. I know this is cheesy, but when you say things out loud, you speak them into existence. You make them real. So just humor me if you don't mind. Say this right alongside me. I am not alone, and I am a real writer. Say it once, twice, 3 times. Hey, record it, start a podcast if you like, but when you say it, believe it, because it's true. Okay? Now do me a favor and tell that nasty inner voice to shut up for a few minutes so the adults can talk. Here are 10 ways to fight imposter syndrome every time it shows up. You're probably wondering how I came up with 10 ways to fight imposter syndrome. Well, I didn't. As part of this article, I asked my fellow writers across Substack, Blue Sky, and Threads to weigh in with their thoughts. Their input fueled the concepts for this article, and you'll find quotes from them all throughout it. After all, imposter syndrome is one of those things that you can't defeat alone. You need the support of your fellow writers and artists to truly beat it. And that's the power of this amazing community. So, with our powers combined, here's what we came up with. Number 1, stay hungry, figuratively. The worst part about imposter syndrome is its tendency to take away your drive and your desire to write. If you let it consume you, you'll lose all interest in your work and convince yourself that you shouldn't try at all. Do not let that happen. You need to stay hungry. Hungry for knowledge, hungry for new stories, hungry for feedback, and hungry for success. I know a lot of douchey entrepreneur types use the term hungry alongside fun terms like hustle and grind, but here, I mean it in a more artistic sense. Artists who are hungry from a creative standpoint are nourished by their craft and by enjoying art from others in all its forms. I'm one of those people. I love writing, but I also love reading other poems and stories as well. If you stay creatively hungry, you'll find that you don't want to write. Instead, you need to write. At that point, imposter syndrome can't stop you. It can slow you down, but that's about it. After all, when you need something, you'll do anything to get it. And here's a quote from Chris Ochoa. First, I ask myself if that inner voice belongs to me or someone else. If it's someone else's voice inside me, I throw it in the garbage and get to work. I cook stories to the best of my ability because I'm hungry. And if you get a chance, check out Chris's work over at Comical Foods. It's really cool stuff. Another thing to remember is that you can't fight imposter syndrome on an empty stomach. When we push ourselves to the brink of burnout, we lose our ability to properly fight back against intrusive thoughts that imposter syndrome likes to use against us. Remember, if you feel off, sometimes all you need is a nap, a snack, or even a shower. Those three things can fix a lot of problems, including imposter syndrome in some cases. Doing something, or really anything else, breaks the mental cycle and gives your brain and body a chance to recharge. And in the article, you'll find a helpful diagram here. It's a comic from Maya Kobabe, also known as Red Gold Sparks, and it portrays a raccoon, and the comic says, "When you feel like everyone hates you, sleep. When you feel like you hate everyone, eat. When you feel like you hate yourself, shower." And this brings me to my last point regarding hunger. Sometimes it's just low blood sugar. If you're anything like me, you forget to eat for hours on end because you're working, or in my case, writing for work as well, and before you know it, you're hangry and you're vulnerable to imposter syndrome and its wiles, which is why this next quote from Smoking GNU over on Blue Sky makes a lot of sense, and it simply says, chocolate. Seriously. Don't underestimate the power of something as simple as a candy bar, a piece of chocolate, or whatever type of sugar you like to intake. Sometimes that's all it takes to put a pep back in our step and to kick imposter syndrome to the curb. Which brings us to number 2. Remember that art is subjective. Our second tip is something that many writers tend to forget when they are in the depths of self-doubt or have recently received a negative review of their work. And first thing I'll say here is it's important to separate genuine criticism from trolls on the internet. If someone leaves a bad review or a negative comment on your book, check to see if it passes the sniff test. In other words, check and see if it's BS or not. If they point out flaws in a specific and genuine way, then it could be considered valid feedback, though in these cases they may not do it in the nicest way. Here's a quote from Shamiz Patel over on Blue Sky. "Reading 1-star reviews of my favorite books reminds me how reading is subjective. In other cases, they may just say something vague and rude, in which case they're just being an asshat, and you can toss their opinion right in the garbage. In either case, these moments can lead to a massive flare-up of imposter syndrome. You'll suddenly convince yourself that this person is right. Somehow their opinion represents the 8 billion people on Earth. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but imposter syndrome has a way of making us believe things like that. So when that happens, remind yourself that art is subjective. There are certain fundamentals that define good writing like grammar and punctuation, but the rest is a matter of opinion. No matter how big or small, every author runs into readers who don't like their books. It's a simple fact of life. But one person's opinion does not and will never define the quality of your work. Number 3, revisit your greatest hits. This strategy is particularly effective for me. One of the best ways to fight back against imposter syndrome is to remind yourself how far you've come. This can be done in a few different ways depending on what works best for you. Try reading one of your old stories that you liked. Go back and read positive comments or feedback you received. Take some time to enjoy the hobbies or activities that inspired you to write stories in the first place. I like to use a combination of all three myself. Sometimes I screenshot messages or comments from fellow Substack writers who said something nice about me or my writing, and when I start feeling down on myself, I'll pull those up as kind of a break in case of emergency sort of backup. And here's a quote from someone over on Blue Sky. "I'd say go back and read some stuff you wrote a while ago to see how far you've come. You can also block out time to consume media, books, games, movies, etc., in the genre that you write. The paradox of imposter syndrome is that it happens despite clear evidence that you're a good writer and deserve the success that you have. A perfect example is, even though I've been working in marketing for 6 years now as a content marketing manager, there's days when I still feel like I'm not qualified for my own job. And when that happens, I stop myself and I ask, well, if I'm not qualified, then how did I make it this far? And with that, the inner critic gets real quiet. Number 4, take away its power. In a lot of fiction and mythology stories, it's generally understood that you have the power over something if you know its name. It's why in horror movies, you'll see the hero track down the name of a monster or demon, because once they have that information, they can control it. Imposter syndrome is very similar, but knowing what it's called isn't enough sometimes. As humans, we're programmed to be afraid of things we don't understand. If what you're feeling doesn't have a name, it tends to be scarier. Here's a great quote from Wajiha Nadim on Substack. "I've named mine the Wicked Witch, and identifying it as such helps me realize the voice isn't real." Consider that quote from Wajiha. She brings up a really good point here. She uses her ability as a writer to give that inner critic a name, and in doing so, she takes power over it and reminds herself that it isn't real. It's just a character, like any other. As creatives, we must remember that despite our mind's ability to get away from us, we're still ultimately in control. If we take away imposter syndrome's power, we can wrench that control back from its claws, talons, tentacles, or whatever appendages it has in your imagination. Number 5, write for yourself first. At the end of the day, we all want success. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. We publish our work in the hopes that people will read it and ideally resonate with it as well. While that's certainly an admirable goal, to truly rise above imposter syndrome's depths, you must write for yourself first. Now, what do I mean by that? We all have our reasons for writing. For some of us, it's simply because we need to tell stories. For others, it's because we enjoy it. And for others, it's a cheaper alternative to therapy. Whatever your reason for writing, focus on the benefits or the reasons that apply to you and go from there. Here's a quote from Psych Med Survivor over on Blue Sky. Always write for yourself. Write what you want, not what you think others might want. If the soul of your work exists in a place where it's meant for you first and foremost, then imposter syndrome can never touch it. You can wish for success and chase your ambitions, but at the end of the day, write for yourself first and foremost, and you'll find that much of that self-doubt simply goes away. Number 6, focus on your unique writing voice. Something I've often said on Substack is that no one can tell a story quite like you, and I believe every word of that. Your writer's voice makes your work unique, and building it is an incredibly important step in your writer's journey. The Flash Fiction February event I ran in 2025 was a perfect example of this. Each day, I gave subscribers a prompt, and you would not believe how many different stories came out of that one idea. Every day I would read wildly different stories born from the same seed. So here's a quote from fellow Substack horror writer Mina Howell. I just try to remember that no one has my voice, and no one can tell stories the way I can. It's incredible, and it showcases how every writer tells their stories differently. When I was younger, I heard that old quote from Mark Twain, "There's no such thing as an original idea." And I'll admit that when I first heard it, I felt a little discouraged. But here's the thing. Just because the hero's journey's been done in every possible way many times over, doesn't mean that anyone's done it exactly like you could. It's those little details, those nuances, those micro decisions where the magic happens in storytelling. Consider this quote from TP Chaos on Substack. Don't listen to that dark voice in the back of your mind trying to eat away at you. So when you hear that voice telling you your stories aren't unique or interesting, do yourself a favor and remind yourself that there's not a single human being out there who can write a story quite like you can. Your art deserves to exist. I've said it before and I'll say it again, over and over until every writer in the world believes it. Number 7, create and manifest your writer's persona. As writers, we have the ability to create something from nothing. That's a superpower, no matter how you slice it. That power isn't limited to just stories on a page either. We can also write our own stories if we choose to do so. It has to be a focused effort. It needs to be intentional. In recent years, I've heard that people can manifest something if they believe in it and speak it into existence. Regardless of your beliefs in the greater machinations of the universe, I think it's true that we as writers can shape reality through our actions. Here's a quote from Robopulp on Substack. Build an image of a professional. Imagine your publisher, literary agent, or editor impatiently waiting for you to deliver the finished work. Rather than evade the responsibility, which is giving into imposter syndrome, you build the situation. So do me a favor real quick. This article's running long, but I promise we're almost there. Close your eyes and imagine a day in your ideal writer lifestyle. What books are you working on? What kind of relationship do you have with your editor or agent? Are you self-published in this vision? Do you have days set aside for marketing and days for writing? Map it all out. Think about it before you open your eyes again. Imagine what it would be like to be in that person's shoes for a day. Now, ignore the voice in your head that I know is saying it's never going to happen. It doesn't know anything. Frankly, its fashion sense is god-awful. Have you seen the shoes it wore the other day? Your imposter syndrome doesn't know anything. If that's how it dresses, I wouldn't trust a single word of it about writing. Sorry. Bit of a tangent there. Ignore the voice in your head and think about what's standing between you and that writer persona you just envisioned. These obstacles are just that. Obstacles. You can dismantle them one by one and build your path to that reality. Remember, you're a writer. So write your story. Number 8, be mindful and introspective. As someone who's suffered anxiety due to trauma and other factors over the course of my life, discovering the concept of mindfulness was a huge step in the right direction for my mental health. It also helped me as a writer. Consider this quote from Glenn Weatherhead, founder of Indie Release Radar and host of the Creative Writing Wizard podcast. Something that has helped me is to try and understand why I feel it, or in what area. Like, what's the trigger for it? It's not always the same across the board. Then, I think about the creative journey and see it not as a competition, but as a bunch of people running their own personal race. There are numerous elements to mindfulness that could fill a whole series of articles, but the core concept is just being present. It's recognizing how you feel in any given moment, down to the most specific details, and simply acknowledging those feelings without judgment. It grounds you in the present, and if you're someone who's always worrying about the past or the future, it's an incredible tool. We can also use it to fight imposter syndrome by shining a spotlight on it when it happens. Consider this quote from Sarah E. Ashley on Substack. I find that pausing to verbally call out my accomplishments and skills helps shift the perspective of imposter syndrome a lot. I was going through this yesterday, and I was like, wait, I've done a lot of things I can be proud of, and listed them. If you can hear that voice creeping up in your mind, pull it out of the shadows where it's most comfortable and confront it, right down there. By forcing your imposter syndrome into the light, pausing to confront it, and addressing it mindfully, you'll quickly begin to see it for what it is: utter nonsense. Examine the doubts, present your evidence, and watch that big scary monster crumble into dust. Number 9, find a mentor. This point is very near and dear to me because I can point out a few people in my life who nurtured and supported me as a writer, but one person in particular stands out as the quote-unquote mentor who really helped me grow into the writer and artist that I am today. Her name was Sophie, and she was my supervisor when I first joined the company where I work at now. At the time, I was hired as a technical writer and worked on an electronics engineering blog. From day one, she was an avid supporter of me and my work, but more than that, she actively sought ways to help me grow as a writer. Here's a quote from Samuel Bowen on some Substack. The only real difference in authors is style and strengths. You won't write the same as the legends you look up to, but your writing will shine in its own way. Sophie wrote articles for the engineering blog, but more than that, she was an electronics engineer herself, and someone who was incredibly good at networking. She knew everyone, and not just on a baseline level. She truly knew them as human beings. Her ability to build community and foster real connections was incredible to see. Needless to say, I was inspired. I realized I could learn so much from her, and I did. Not only did she help me grow as a professional writer, but she also gave me that push that I needed to restart my creative writing as well. As many of you know, I've been publishing on another platform called Vocal for 4 years now, and I still post articles and stories over there, but I've since switched over to Substack since the audience here is a lot bigger, and the growth has been incredible since I joined. Sophie was the one who told me about Vocal, though. She saw the writing challenges they do, and she encouraged me to try one out. The rest, as they say, is history. I worked with Sophie for several years before she moved on to other things, and while it's unfortunately the case that we haven't talked in a while, I still think about all the things she taught me. She often described herself as someone who planted seeds for incredible ideas, nurtured them to grow, and then moved on to repeat the process elsewhere. And she certainly did that for me. I don't think I'll ever be able to articulate how much I appreciate the time and energy she devoted to helping me evolve as a writer and a human being. I learned so much from her that I can confidently say that I wouldn't be the writer I am today without her mentorship, and I do mean that from a professional and creative perspective. If she was here, she would say that it's all me, but I like to give credit where it's due. Did I have the potential? Yes, but I didn't see it. I needed someone else to see it and convince me to ignite that spark. So I guess what I'm trying to say is find yourself a Sophie. Someone with the wisdom and knowledge to support you and the desire and drive to see you grow into the best version of yourself. These people don't come along often, but when they do, their support will stick with you for the rest of your life. I hope that one day I can pay it forward and support another writer, or many writers if I'm lucky, in a similar fashion. Number 10. Seek support in the writing community. All right, the final tactic in this gigantic imposter syndrome article. But this is always something I have to mention when it comes to furthering your craft as a writer. The writing community, especially on Substack, is filled with supportive, enthusiastic, and genuine human beings, and I know that from experience. They want you to succeed just like I do. They are the living embodiment of the cure for imposter syndrome. Sometimes all you need is someone to remind you that you're a good writer, that you're a real writer, and that your art deserves to exist. Consider this quote from Nazish Nassim on Substack. I shake before writing anything. I shake before posting anything. There isn't a time when I think I've produced anything brilliant, but I do it anyway. I do it anyway. So don't be afraid to ask for their support. If you feel down on yourself or your art, just reach out. It can be a note, a DM to me if you want, or whatever you need. Ask for feedback if you're worried about a piece you've written. Invite people to beta read or give you their thoughts on an excerpt. Are there trolls and less positive people hiding out there on Substack and across the internet? Yeah, but that's a fact of life. You can't be afraid of people like that because they're the exception to the rule. The vast majority of writers are collaborative, friendly, and supportive. And I'll tell you how I know. Because they've felt imposter syndrome too. We all have. No one's above it, but there are plenty of ways to fight it. So I hope you found a few ways to do that yourself in this insanely long article. Again, a huge thank you and shout out to all the writers who contributed through the quotes that I mentioned in this piece. And as always, I am here for my fellow writers. If you need anything at all, you only have to ask. So let's kick imposter syndrome to the curb and get back to writing.